Welcome. I'm Richard Waller, Executive Director of the University of Richmond Museums. I'm standing here with my co-curator of this exhibition, Hadley Beckstrand, who is a senior art history major and was our 2021 Harnett Summer Research Fellow. And she worked on this exhibition that includes selections from our collection, the Harnett Print Study Center collection, and working closely with Frank Razor and the Razor collection at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And Hadley will talk about some of the prints that we've included here on the signage wall for the entry to the exhibition.
So as you can see in the middle, this is a piece by Charles Daubigny, who was a French printmaker, and it captures kind of that fleeting countryside, the disappearing countryside that occurred as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And he actually typically portrayed more waterscapes, but in this piece it's a very idyllic landscape where the cows are kind of traipsing into the water. And he was heavily influenced by a colleague that you'll see later on in the exhibition, Corot. And after meeting Corot, he actually bought a small boat called Le Bouton, and where he would do his kind of plein air work outside, and he would capture that freshness of nature.
We included these three prints to show a range of what you're going to experience in the exhibition. And next to the print that Hadley just discussed, we have a Whistler landscape that you don't associate Whistler with landscape.
Well, with Whistler, he was an American artist, and he was known for his very evocative pieces, which you'll see throughout the exhibition. It really explores, what a landscape is and what it means to a variety of people. But as you can see in this landscape, there are some trees, but it's not as covered in trees as a lot of pieces you see early on are, and some people enjoying that a little picnic on the grass. And so he captures kind of that aspect of landscapes and, quiet, serene nature.
So that's an introduction to what you're going to find in this exhibition of Arcadian Idylls. There was a fascination with earthly paradise and Arcadia, finding Arcadia. And you're going to find wonderful examples of that in this exhibition. On this wall, we have three prints by Turner, and we have one of Hadley's favorite prints in this selection of Turner prints. Hadley?
So with Turner, one of his main techniques was utilizing kind of abstract lines and whatnot to create a sense of emotion and passion. Good. As you can see, there are kind of short staccatoed lines that are utilized to create kind of this turbulent landscape. And so that was kind of key in his romantic sensibility that you see throughout his pieces. Evidenced here, you can also see the lines, but they're employed in a very different way. It kind of shows this beautiful, majestic landscape as opposed to the torrid water below that bluff in this piece.
We start this wall with two prints by Huet of really beautiful landscapes from the early 1820s and 30s.
Paul Huet was a French printer and painter, and he captured a lot of his landscapes outside of Paris, and he captured these kind of picturesque scenes, as you can see, with Entrée de Bois, which is entrance to the woods, and then the Deux Chaumières, which are the two cottages. And he likewise used plein air techniques where he would go outside and he would create his landscapes by looking at changing seasons and then weather conditions in order to capture unique elements of the landscapes.
Here we have three prints by Mary Nemo Moran, and we're excited to include this artist because it's the only woman artist in the exhibition. And Hadley, would you like to talk more about
The pieces that we have here really do exemplify her talent as a printmaker. She was an American printer, and she worked in a lot of, she also did a lot of plein air techniques, so she would work outside in order to capture kind of quiet elements of landscape, which are not really seen in a lot of pieces. And she used a lot of free and vigorous lines in order to capture that endearing quality of the landscapes. And yeah, she was the only woman among 65 original fellows in the London's Royal Society of Painters and Etchers, and her prints won several awards.
We're excited to have a couple of prints by Corot in this exhibition. And Hadley, you want to talk about Corot?
Yes. Okay, so Corot was a key printmaker during the 19th century, and he was in the Barbizon School. And so he likewise did a lot of plein air work outside, but a key part of his artistic journey was going to Italy, and these are based on his trip. And there he was heavily influenced by kind of those old masters during the Renaissance, and he wanted to kind of capture that classic architecture.
This is one of his prints that's reworked, and you see it in the published version, and an earlier proof of the print is on top. So we included 6 prints by Seymour Hayden in this exhibition. His work is so fundamentally a part of the 19th century obsession with landscape, and we have a nice range that we've included. And the 4 here, you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so Seymour Hayden actually had been practicing to become a surgeon, and so as a result of that, he had a very meticulous hand, as you'll be able to see throughout the prints. He was able to just draw very meticulous, precise lines in his pieces, and he used kind of a loose, spontaneous technique that was also shared by Impressionists later on, but he tended to explore kind of the fantasy of landscapes. He didn't really it was loosely based on real geography, but he would kind of use his imagination, and it would become this kind of mix of real and then also fantastical, which is a really interesting thing to explore. And you can kind of see all of his work, all of that culminate into his early riser print.
Yeah, let's go over to see the other 2 prints by Seymour Hayden. Early Riser by Seymour Hayden is one of the favorite prints by most people that have visited the exhibition. And why do you think that is?
Well, early riser kind of typifies Hayden's, techniques and how he would create his pieces, because you can see that meticulous, precise hand in early riser with all of the slight lines and even that sun, which is in the background. And it does really kind of explore this kind of cross between reality, but also that majestic, like early morning, mist. And so it really kind of epitomizes Seymour Hayden as an artist.
And it's a mixture of mezzotint with engraving.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's part of that 19th century need to experiment with how you present the landscape. These 2 prints are by Samuel Palmer, and what would you like to point out in those?
Well, Palmer, in his prints, he really did explore that theme of, fragility and that disappearing countryside as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And so in these prints, you can see this kind of quiet yet beautiful landscape with, the sheep, and then these beautiful trees and sunsets or rises. And so the work kind of serves as this visible expression of beliefs and traditions and lifestyles and spirituality that kind of underpinned rural communities that were slowly disappearing because of the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. Here we have Maxime Lalande and several of his prints.
Lalande's prints really kind of varied. He would have kind of these vast landscapes and then also kind of more intimate serene landscapes, and also even coastal work, but his work really heavily influenced American landscape printmaking, and he had a treatise on etching that even now is a standard text on etching production. And so as you can see, there is this kind of variance between just the trees as a landscape versus people and then the actual land. And so he does have a lot of diversity within his prints.
Let's take a closer look at these three prints by two different artists. You want to talk about them?
So this print was by Stephen Parrish, and he's an American artist. And in this exhibition, there's a lot of, English and French, and it's really nice to have American artists like Mary Nemo Moran and then also Stephen Parrish who do explore, that American landscape, which isn't exactly that typical, classic landscape. But in this, it's kind of a swampy marsh, and it does help kind of question what is a landscape and what a landscape is to different people in different countries. And these two pieces by Norbert Canu also kind of explore that question, because as you can see on the top one, which is called Paysage, which is countryside, it's kind of barren, there's not really much, and it's not exactly what most would identify as a typical landscape print, but it does, question that kind of genre.
And it's kind of a beautiful, different way of looking at it.
Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in kind of that simplicity and that, barrenness.
On this part of the exhibition, we look at two different artists, and we'll start with Constable.
John Constable was a pivotal printmaker during the 19th century, and he influenced a lot of other printmakers, including Paul Huet, who we looked at earlier. And he was heavily influenced by Dutch artists such as Rubens, which you can kind of see in the clouds of this piece. You see that kind of Rubens-esque, curves and movement, making it very, vibrant and whatnot. And so Constable's kind of vitality was a staple in his pieces and kind of made them extremely original. And he was actually primarily self-taught, which is another interesting fact about him.
And the other thing is that this is by Frank Short, who chose to work after a print by Constable. And we have some other Frank Short prints here, so if you want to talk about.
So if you see over here, Frank Short likewise kind of explores what a landscape is. He had one of his key techniques was using lines, kind of exploring that power of lines, as you can see in this image. And in this piece, you can see all these different kinds of landscapes, ranging from kind of industrial canal to this kind of plains with windmills to a mountain range that's very misty, and he kind of underscores that concept of Arcadian Idylls.
We've had a look at some of the most amazing prints of landscape imagery that was created during the 19th century. And on this wall, we end with works that are just before the turn of the century. So they're dated 1900, so still a 19th century print, and still looking at what was occurring at that time, as well as looking forward to the 20th century.
Yeah, so this is a etching by Sir Muirhead Bone, and it really does capture that turn of the century. Sir Bone was a war artist, actually, in the First and Second World Wars, and he would capture in his prints kind of industrial urban life. And later on in the war, he would capture evacuating soldiers, portraits of officers. And so he kind of does capture and portray the harsh realities of human nature and life, and explores that through his landscapes. And he kind of does question at that turn of the century what is a landscape and how has it changed throughout that century.